Okay. Oh, hi. Oh.
Hi. What do I have to do?
I'm
Just
Lila,
listen?
and I'm horizontal.
I'm Becca, and I'm horizontal with Lila.
Sex positive culture.
It's my body to give.
Are threesome gifts a thing?
Taking a bath.
I like your bed.
Horizontal.
Horizontal.
This is Horizontal with Lila.
Take a little lie down, loves. Find a place to be horizontal. Horizontal is the podcast about intimacy that's entirely recorded while lying down. Most episodes are recorded in my bed on my Casper mattress at Hacienda Villa, the sex-positive intentional community in Bushwick, Brooklyn. The others are recorded while horizontal elsewhere. This quickie was recorded live at my podcast launch pajama party on May 21st, 2017, at Hacienda Studio, a sex-positive event space in Bushwick, Brooklyn. My guests enjoyed reiki, massage, empathy sessions, and cookies upon arrival. After a brief cuddling tutorial from one of my housemates, a professional cuddler, 50 people in kimonos, flannels, onesies, and short shorts got horizontal and snuggly on an enormous megabed the size of 3 kings put together. Meanwhile, on a bed island across the room, my guest and I arranged ourselves as we would for any horizontal recording session, lying on our backs, almost ear to ear, sharing a pillow, microphones hanging down above us, with a starry blanket as our backdrop. Won't you please come lie down with us? So, when I was in college, I met my best friend. And we met because she was living with a boy named Garrett. And the first night that we all hung out together, we watched the movie Dangerous Beauty. And I cried, kind of in their arms, and I loved it. And I thought, this is, we were kind of animal-like around each other at the very beginning. Like, are we going to like each other? Are we going to be enemies? And we decided that we were going to like each other. We were really going to like each other. And we remained best friends for 10 years. When I graduated from college and I went to Brazil and then I came back, I moved in with her into a railroad apartment in Greenpoint, which was, cockroach infested, and you had to walk through one bedroom to get to the bathroom, which is just not a fitting way for an adult to live. But I was not an adult. I was 20. I graduated before I was even old enough to drink. So we were in our early 20s, and we used to joke that our early 20s were about seeing each other be good in bad plays and overhearing each other have sex. And I loved her deeply. I never had a sibling. My parents tried, and I really wanted one. I always wanted a sibling when I was a kid, and they just couldn't. My mom had me when she was 41. They were both 41, actually. And so at that point, it was just a miracle to have me anyway, and they called me their miracle baby, and they couldn't have anybody else. So we got a cat named Tigger, and that was my brother, and we kind of fought like brother and sister. I got lots of scratches and kind of hit. Sometimes I would hit the cat because, we would have our little tiffs. So this was my sister figure, and she looked like me. Occasionally someone would mistake one of us for the other, and we both had, vaguely ambiguously ethnic / Jewish features. And we hosted a lot of parties, and we struggled, and we barely paid our rent. She was working at a coffee shop on Bedford Avenue, and I was working the front desk at Bliss Spa, which is a fucking miserable job. I'm sorry for the people who have it now. And we were just always together. And then she moved out in order to move in with a boy. And she was always in love. She was always finding the one, but didn't recognize that, after 10 the ones, like this one is not the one either, She moved across the country. She moved to Portland, Oregon. We went on a cross-country road trip together a couple years after she moved out, which is the summer that you and I stopped teaching together. And she was a pain in the ass. I had set up this acro yoga tour and people were really happy to receive me and to host us, but they were happy to see me, and she couldn't stand. I realized much, much later, whenever I was the shiny one, she was the shiny one. She was the one wearing glitter and, being cute, and I was the one who had to tell the guys to go away. That was my role in our relationship, which I don't enjoy because I like being shiny myself. And I didn't realize it until much, much later. I just knew that, my mom didn't like her, and she was possessive, but so was I. So I didn't really realize it. So she's in the car with me, and I paid for pretty much that whole trip. The gas prices were the highest in history, like $4.20 a gallon or something. And I managed to get through that trip because I had set up workshops all along the country without debt. And I paid essentially for her to come. I paid for most of her food, and I paid for all the gas, and I got us places to stay. And so I was the star, right, of this trip. And she would become, whenever we would enter somebody's home or we'd be going out to dinner with people who were hosting us, she was ungrateful, and she was unfriendly, and I had to apologize for her. So I took her across the country, and I left her in Portland, and I met her fiance, which is, I think, 3 or 4 fiancés ago, and didn't really enjoy him very much, and we kind of drifted for a little bit. But she got a new one, and then a couple of years later, I decided to leave. I moved to Portland. A couple of years later, I decided to leave Portland. I go traveling, and after 6 months of my tour, I totally burned out. And I had things scheduled until month 9, so I pushed through until month 9. And she was living out in Bend, and I was in Portland, and I was being taken care of. My friend Kiara let me stay in her guest bedroom, and she was taking me to the naturopathic doctor, and she was taking me to meditation, and she was making sure that I went out into the world. And I think I was my self-diagnosis is that I was in adrenal fatigue, because I just didn't have it. And I became the most depressed that I had ever been in my entire life. And that's when I went to stay with my mom for a couple months. But right before that, she said, "You come out to visit me. Come out to visit me. I'm your sister. I'm exactly the person that you should be with when you feel like this." And I said, okay. And my friend Billy agreed to drive me to Bend, turn around, and go back to Portland. He drove me to Bend, and I got to meet her new boyfriend. And as soon as I met him, there was a underlying danger to him, a glint of what I later would describe as violence. And I did not say anything. I was super depleted. And this is just one of the ways in which I had showed up for her many, many times in many, many different situations, including right before that, going to pick up her wedding dress from the fiance before at the ex-boyfriend's house before I went to visit her in Bend. I arrived in Bend, and they were living in a little sort of garage kind of carriage house, and they didn't have a place for me to sleep. So I'm totally depressed. I am completely depleted. I have no energy, and they wanted me to sleep on the floor. So I go to my mother's, I go to my father's, I recuperate, I decide to move back to New York City. I'm going to put a pause on that piece of it and tell you about Patrick, which you already know. But when I was living in Greenpoint with Anna on nerve.com, I met Patrick Kelly. And Patrick was living on 4th Street in Williamsburg, and he looked like an angel. He was blonde-haired and blue-eyed and had these big pink lips, and he had the warmest voice. And I loved him. I loved him deeply. And he was very sick. He had chronic fatigue. Later, I think he was diagnosed with several co-infections, but I think it had gotten so bad at that point that there was just really no recuperation for him. I remember he saw you a couple times, and he came to me afterwards and said, "Oh my God, I just saw Becca. I have so much energy." And then he would crash harder. Mm-hmm. And it seemed to be, as near as I could tell, the onset was close after the death of his mother, after that trauma. But he never found a tick. He was never, he never knew, I was bitten. And he was trying to do all the right things. He was trying to eat all the right things. He was trying to rest. Many times I would call him up for a date, and he would say, I just can't, And I was just becoming an acro yoga teacher, and, wanted to share it with him. And he really couldn't. Like, he didn't even have the energy to be flown. And I just kept coming around because I loved his soul and wanted to be near him. And then one night we were walking in Williamsburg, and he said, "I cannot do this with you because it's as though I have a broken leg, and I could lean on you for a while and put the crutches aside, and we could walk a while together. But at some point, I'd become too heavy for you, and you would leave me, and I would have no crutches, and I would have no you." And I protested and said that that's not what I would do, but it very well might have been. I just didn't have the chance to see if that's what would have happened. Because he broke up with me. And I even, continued kind of trying to keep connected to him, but eventually we fell out of contact. And when I went into that adrenal fatigue state, I thought, who knows about this? And when I was at my father's and I was recuperating by stacking firewood, Dad had several cords of wood, and I was bringing the wood from out in the yard into the shed, and it became my art for 4 weeks. And I reached out to Patrick, and at that point he was deeply ill. Deeply ill. He had moved to DC. He was living with his father, who he hated, who he really just had a bad relationship with, but it was his last resort. He was working as a writer, and he didn't have, his brain was so foggy. He didn't have the wherewithal to write, to do that work. And yet he was in all of these forums, and he was talking to all these people with chronic fatigue and helping them and supporting them. And when I reached out to him feeling the most, he called it newborn baby fawn raw, just so unworthwhile and depleted and disappointed in myself and exhausted. And he wrote me the most incredible email. He talked with me on the phone, and then he wrote me this incredible email. And at the end of it, he said, "You are wonderful, and you will remember it soon." And I decided to move back to New York and moved to Bushwick. It was 3 months after we had communicated, and I was walking along the street, as I do, and it's terrible, looking at Facebook. And I scrolled and I saw his post, and he said, it said, Patrick Kelly is grateful. And I, for some reason, caught that, and I was rushing from one place to the other, but I made a comment and I wrote, and loved, also loved. And a few days later, he was dead. I only know because I commented on that Facebook post, and he liked it, which means he saw it before he died. And then in the thread, it said R.I.P. And I said, what the fuck? What the fuck? And I went to the studio where I was teaching, and I said to people, how do you find out if someone has died? I didn't know how you found out. And eventually someone said, call the coroner's office. So I called the coroner's office in D.C. And this woman with a really thick accent picks up the phone, and I said, excuse me, do you have Patrick Kelly? And she said, just hold on a moment. And she came back on the phone and said, yes, we do have someone by that name. And I hung up the phone, and I really wanted to talk to an adult. And none of them picked up the phone. So I called Anna, because ostensibly she was still my best friend. But a few weeks earlier, she'd had a fight with that now fiance, the one who I felt that spark of violence in. And I used that opportunity to tell her my truth, which was, Anna, I don't think this is the man for you to marry. And she said, I know. When we fight like this, I don't want to live. And then they made up, and I didn't say anything more. I said, I only have to say this once, but I have to say it. And I said it. I don't think this is the man for you to marry. And then Patrick committed suicide, and I called her, and she was very frosty. And I expressed such grief at losing that love. And she said, Lila, he's dead, and if you were meant to be together, he wouldn't be. And then she told me that her parents didn't want me to be invited to the wedding. She uninvited me from the wedding. And I have no idea to this day how I had the grace at the end of that conversation to say, if our friendship has to end here, I want you to know that I wish you well. Click. I've never spoken to her again. 6 months later, I got a message, and it said, Pookie. By the way, I don't think you get to call someone your pet name after uninviting them from your wedding, but Pookie, you were right. Love, Pookie. I didn't respond. A few weeks later, she said, I'm in New York. Would you like a hug? And my heart was racing. And I thought about it, and I really did want a hug. I really did want a hug from her. And I said, I have this window. I will be at this coffee shop. I'll be at Cave in Bushwick. I have this window of 2 hours. And she said, oh, yeah, that's really early. You know, we're going to be going to a jazz show the night before. And I thought, oh, fuck you. Fuck you. Fuck you. I am done. I am so done. They got divorced. They got married. They got divorced. And maybe a year later, I was curious, and I looked up her profile on Facebook. Husband number 2. So I want to know, what's the word for breakup when it's with a friend.
That's a good question. Break up.
Doesn't sound right.
Does it hurt more with a friend?
I think so. It still hurts. I can still feel it. But I realized that I had shown up for her in all the important ways. And when it really mattered, she showed up for me when it didn't matter that much. When it really mattered, when my mom was in the ICU and I needed a ride to the airport and I was a few minutes late because I was fucking a disaster. She said she could no longer take me because she was going to be late for her job delivering muffins. And I don't deserve that. If I show up for you, I want you to show up for me.
Maybe more death than breakup.
Friend death.
Mm-hmm.
That's what it is.
That it's harder to grieve for someone who's still alive.
The end.
I have huge appetite.
And that's what's horizontal.
Love you.
I love you. Thanks, Becca.
Mm-hmm.
If you'd like to become a patron of the Horizontal Arts, support me on Patreon, a website for crowdsourcing patronage. Having patrons allows artists like me to buy equipment, schedule cross-country and global tours, and devote my time to creating more and more horizontal goodness for you. Becoming my patron has delicious perks, ranging from exclusive photos and behind-the-scenes video content to handwritten postcards, and I'll tell you that my handwriting is ridiculous, spring cleaning phone calls, and creative input on future episodes. You can become a patron for $1 a month on up, and the rewards just get more sumptuous. Patreon.com/horizontal with Lila. That's patreon.com/horizontal with Lila. Horizontal's theme music was created by Alan Markley. You can find his gorgeous blue eyes and rock star visage on Instagram as Plastic Cannons. My saucy cover art was designed and illustrated by Shauna Shea. Check out her gorgeous character illustrations on shaunashay.com, ShaNashay.com. Every episode is mixed and mastered by Owen Muir of Self-Disclosure Productions. Owen's own podcast, Self-Disclosure, in which people speak openly and often for the very first time about their experiences with mental health, is coming soon. Listen, if you are a person with feelings. For most things horizontal, head to horizontalwithlila.com and sign up for the mailing list. It's getting really exciting on Horizontal with Lila. There are detailed show notes with vocabulary words. There's a glossary and links to all sorts of informative articles and sexy guidance and sensual photos. And if you sign up, they'll be delivered right to your inbox. Thanks for listening. You're listening to Horizontal, the podcast of intimate relationships.